Hey, hey!
Hey everybody!
So, we are continuing the series on the fight for love. And today we're going to talk a little bit about why have we stayed married, and really discuss that. So, why, in your opinion, have we stayed married?
Yeah, so we stayed married because we love each other. Despite the good and the bad times, we were able to survive the bad. And honestly, the good outweighed the bad. So despite everything we were going through, we survived. And obviously, it's something that continues to connect us and why we stay together.
Survival is what's connecting us.
Yeah. Marriage is work. And marriage is work. However, we had tough times, but we were able to talk through them, work through them, and so that's not something that you just walk away from.
All right. So, what would you say is one of the toughest things in your mind that we have dealt with in our marriage?
That's a good question. I think the infertility battle was a little tough for us because you're trying to communicate your emotions, but also process your emotions as well. And so it's different from a woman versus a man's perspective, because obviously we go through it physically, but you guys go through it emotionally, but you're trying to be there for us, but also match your emotions. And then sometimes I felt like that played a big role into our marriage. So I think that was really one of the tough things in our marriage.
How do you feel it played a tough role in our marriage?
Trying to adapt, because we had got married in 2016, and that was our first miscarriage that year before relocating to New Mexico. So I think in that part we were coming together as one, living together, and then was happy to announce that we were, expecting, lost the baby, and then we're moving to New Mexico. So that was a lot, being newlyweds. More things that you, like, going through that was something more than what you would talk about in premarital counseling. Like, I don't think there would have been anything that kind of would have prepared you for that emotionally. So I think being able to talk through that, New Mexico was something that really stretched us and helped us to grow. Being away from our families and kind of really just concentrating on each other and communicating and learning our styles of living together and learning one another, because you date and you're engaged, but you really don't know that person until, like, y'all living together. Like, you live together and you're like, okay, like, this is real. Like, we don't just go to our separate homes, like, we here. So I think that was really something that was how we were able to, like, what played a big part of the tough time of our marriage. Yeah.
Fair. For me, I think it was communication and really trying to understand one another. We were raised in very different homes, and for me, that focus on, like, how do we communicate with one another. My style of communication is very direct, very blunt, and that was how I was raised. Right, tough love, loving, but like tough love. Like, get going. Like, ain't nobody got time to be sitting around here, playing with you. Especially not if you're in there whining. But I think that played a really big key role in, like, some of the tough moments for us. At one point in time, we had taken a trip to Arizona, and that was really tough. And a lot of that was around communication. It was around, like, the lack of and not being able to the point, right, where I was considering, like, saying, see you later. I couldn't do this no more. Like, this is just, we're to that point of, like, I don't think the communication is where it needs to be, or improving, yeah. Right. And so, we had gotten to that point, and I was like, I don't think I want to do this. And it was a horrible trip. It was a beautiful trip, but it was a horrible trip at the same time. So much so that I didn't even put the pictures on our little travel map, because I was like, I don't think you gotta take us on that trip to Arizona, because I don't think we want those pictures on there as the memory. You said, do you remember that? Because every time I pulled a picture up, you was about to divorce me.
Well, I mean, those are the good moments. Again, why we're still together, because you're able to survive those moments. There are some couples who unfortunately are not able to, and it's really like a deal breaker for them. And you have to want to be able to put the work in and make the changes.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for everybody, things are different, right? I mean, everyone has different situations and things that they're dealing with, and the ups and the downs from that perspective can just be a struggle. And I think one of the keys and the reason that I had gotten to the point of wanting the divorce was that feeling that I was in it alone, that feeling that I was the only one trying to make changes. I was the only one really trying to like consider, that's the feeling, right? And although, you know, I know down in my heart that there was a care and a desire from your perspective, you know, that still put me in a space of feeling like, well, I don't know if I want to do this. And some cases people don't get that return, right? They don't get that space where finally they make that switch. And they say, you know what, I want to come up out of this. So for you, I know that was a tough time. May not have been the toughest moment for you, but like, what was the flip for you when it came to attitude and communication? Because you know that was the tough thing.
I was trying to bring my little attitude. I'm just kidding. Really just hearing you out. I think one thing is like when you communicate, you can communicate. But then I think as we talk about, like I was listening to respond more so, and like, all right, what I do wrong. Going into the conversation the wrong way, like with the negative perspective more so. And I think once I understood like what you were feeling like, because at one point in the marriage it was like flipped when I felt like, well, you don't understand, like what you're saying is really hurtful, or like how you're presenting it. And so like I felt like you wasn't understanding, so I was able to put myself back into that perspective and be like, okay, so now I know what he really feels like. Like these are the things that he's asking me to do, which are not like, doesn't cost money, obviously, like it just putting in effort, like putting that time in and saying like, okay, I want my marriage to work, so these are the things that I have to do in order to meet you halfway at the table, and be like, okay, like these are our non-negotiables, like, and then for us, these are our non-negotiables together, but individually, like, hey, what is your point where it's like, okay, we need to walk away from the conversation, and what is my point where it's like, okay, we need to walk away from the conversation, and then really like you said, growing up from different households, being able to like communicate like my feelings and how I feel, but also like not stay there, right? Like not say like, this is what I'm going to talk about, we're only going to talk about my feelings and that's it, because obviously there's another person in the relationship, so you have to also consider their feelings and their emotions. So yeah, absolutely.
No, it's key things. So what would you say was something that was big that like tore us apart? Like what is something that you feel like either it be an action or a situation or a specific thing that happened? Like what do you think was the big thing that tore us apart?
Yeah, I think our constant like arguments at the beginning of our marriage was like the biggest thing that tore us apart, and especially relocating. I was not trying to relocate in the beginning. So like that was added on to the arguments that we were having, of just like some things were silly, some things were not as silly, but then like the constant like arguing, like, okay, like why are we arguing, like what? And then we would argue and then like go to a whole different subject into a different argument on top of that argument, and it's just like, it's 12 o'clock in the morning, like I gotta go to work the next day, like this is not good for us health-wise, mental health-wise, physical, emotional health. And so I think that was like the biggest thing. I'm like, I cannot be like on this emotional roller coaster, it felt like. But that was because we were just not getting to know, like we were saying, the boundaries and things. But that for me was like the biggest thing. What would you say?
I agree. The arguments were rough. And long, and I mean, you know me, when I'm done, I ain't trying to deal with this no more.
Come back and like
yeah, like Chanel was infamous for, I ain't got nothing else to say, I walk away and there's a 4-page text message on my phone. But I think for me, I agree, like that was really rough. And I mean, I remember some specific moments where like, you know, I'd be at work, and you know these messages are flying back and forth, and phone calls, and you know it laid over from the night before. It was like 4 or 5 hours into like an argument, and I think at that time, like what I didn't realize, what I see today that I didn't realize then, is like no matter what feeling that you have, if you're in a marriage together, your feeling is going to be based off of your partner's feeling. As much as you say like, nah, I'm my own person, I'm independent, like if your wife is having a bad day, or your husband's having a bad day, or your significant other, right? If you're getting preparing for marriage, whatever it is, like if they're having a bad day, you having a bad day. Even if you're thinking like, nah, I'm good, you doing your thing, before you know it, in your mind, you're driving down the road and you're like, but she better not say that. Right? You still going.
I better have a meal when I get
right,
home.
like, and then it just continues, and you're waiting. You're ultimately waiting on that message to just pop off and be like, boom. Yeah. Like, oh no, I've been holding this back for you, boo boo.
Come here, boo boo.
So I think I agree with you. Like those were probably the biggest things that like tore us apart. Which I guess rolls right into the next question, which is like, what role should or does God play in a marriage? Like, what role should he play?
So, should and does play in our marriage is the foundation, like truly the foundation, because he can't, like if the Lord's not the foundation, or that's not something that we're connecting to spiritually, then he's unable to hear from him, which means that he's unable to lead, which means that I'm following him, but we have no clear direction. And so unfortunately we're just kind of like, we're just out there. Yeah. And so I think one thing that really connected us more was our Bible studies. Like we were doing our Bible studies together, praying together, we would journal, we would, have that conversation, but really he has to be the foundation of the marriage, and should be the foundation of the marriage, because that's, that's giving you what you need to build off of. Right.
And as a husband, I will say, like, often the world gives us this view of like, oh, you need to be everything, you need to be this macho person and know everything, know all the things, if you will. But that's not the case. Like, you don't know everything. You're learning. You're still growing. We got married. I was 27 at that time, and so although I had a lot of life experiences, it's still I don't know everything, and I don't know truly how to live with someone all the time, having to care for a home beyond myself. I mean, I remember days where I had no money, and bank account was red. One of the local banks was calling me up like, excuse me, sir, you got your money? Because we got nothing and you got nothing. But I mean, there was periods of time where, even the gas got turned off, so there was no heat in the apartment and all those types of things. And that's me though. That's me caring for myself. And if I got to turn the oven on to heat the apartment, which I've had to do, then you just do what you got to do. But when you get into a marriage and you get into this process, like you have to recognize as a man, like you don't know it all, and that's okay. And that's where that foundation of trusting and believing in God comes into play, and he has to be the one that runs things, and he has to be the one that you go to. Specifically for us, and just talking about, one of the things that tore us apart was arguments. That's where he came into play a big role for us. There was a period of time where, we'd be arguing and we got to the point where we're like, all right, we got to pray. You got to take a moment to like, let's pause all of this and let's pray. Let's talk about it. And there was one argument I remember specifically as we were even preparing to try to get to a big next step in our marriage where, we had to pray the enemy away, right? Like there's a moment where I'm sitting there and I'm like, whoa, this is not my wife that's talking. This is not me that's talking. This is literally the enemy involved in our marriage and involved in our moment. And we're allowing him to run, whether that be just our minds waiting on the next response, or, oh, well, remember she did this, or remember he did that later on, all those things, instead of stopping and praying and saying like, Lord, help us in this moment to see and really hear each other and understand, like, what is the other person saying?
Yeah, good point. I mean, honestly, you can't go back and bring up different things that have happened as far as arguments, once that argument is done, it's completed, you've grown and you move on from it, like you can't go back and like bring it back up.
Well, and that, it calls out a good point though, like being cautious and mindful of not going backwards, right? Like we've had to talk about that a lot, especially with the things that we've struggled with, being cautious and careful not to like bring those back up and well, you remember you used to,
leave the key to my car.
I may have said that. I'm like, ooh. Yeah, I may have said that, but I mean, all those things are real, and today we can laugh about it. But there was a period of time where we couldn't even talk about it, like not at all. Like, whose car? Who paid the note? I paid rent. That's what I think. So it's interesting, but I think that's where again we're bringing God in and Him being the foundation and being reminded, like just because God's the foundation, just because you are saved, just because you're working at being saved, just because you're learning this now and you're trying to get there, you are still going to have struggles. You are still going to have arguments. You're still going to have disagreements. We still have them today.
But it's just not as bad as 4 or 5, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely. Like, it's like 30 minutes. Like, are you done? Is
Like,
dinner
no.
gonna be, am I ordering dinner? Like, what's happening? Like, that's just where we go. But we're thankful for that. I mean, and that took time, and it takes growth, and it takes really looking at each other and saying, like, I'm not perfect. You know, although it may seem like I have a lot of things together, I'm not perfect, and I make mistakes, and things are going to happen. But through the grace of God, like, I'm trying to do better, and I'm trying to be a better husband, a better partner in this process.
Yeah, I think you made a good point. Like, you're always evolving, because when you look at from a spirituality standpoint, you never arrive, because if you arrive, then you're not on earth. So for just always know, like, you're not where you, even if you're not where you want to be, just know, like, the Lord will continue to keep you and guide you to where you want to be. But you just have to truly, like, put your trust in Him, and you have to both do it collectively. So, like, I can't be on a spiritual journey and then you're out there like, whatever, like, she can go figure out what she want to do. Lord help her. Like, we have to both be on that spiritual journey to be like, we want to be closer to with you, Lord, but we want to be closer together. And then, like, show us what we're to do separately in our lives, but also how that plays a major part of us, like, together collectively.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
for sure. I think it plays into what we'll talk about in another series, but, like, how does the individual play in, right? Like, how do we look at ourselves, and how do, I make sure that I'm where I need to be? Because it's very easy, especially in arguments, to be like, I did my part, right? I don't know what she doing, I don't know what he doing, but I know what I said, and I said what I said, that kind of moment. So, it is what it is. See, she's still living in the past, y'all. No, that's it. All right, y'all. Well, hopefully this was helpful. Again, we're going to keep going on this series. Thank you for those that have already thrown questions out there. Please continue to throw some additional questions and comments in the comments section, and tell us how you dealt with it. Right? What are the big things that you all are dealing with out there? What was a big item that has torn you apart or is tearing you apart? And how did you fix it, resolve it, or are you in the process of looking to do so? So, until the next time, we'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.